The grand auditorium at Stanford University buzzed with anticipation. Every seat was taken, with students, professors, and business leaders filling the room. Some had flown in from across the country just to witness the moment. The occasion? A special keynote speech by none other than Clint Eastwood. At 94 years old, the legendary actor, director, and producer was still as formidable as ever. Time had carved lines into his face, but his eyes held the same steely determination that made him an icon. The invitation to speak had been extended months ago, and to everyone's delight, he had accepted. As the large wooden doors at the back of the auditorium swung open, the murmur of the crowd hushed. The unmistakable figure of Eastwood walked in, slow but purposeful. Dressed in a simple brown leather jacket, black jeans, and a crisp white shirt, he exuded effortless charisma. The microphone stand awaited him at the center of the stage, but before reaching it, he took a moment to survey the crowd. Then, with that legendary Eastwood squint, he smirked and said, "Well, I guess I'm supposed to talk about success. Let's see if I can pull that off." The room erupted in laughter. As the applause settled, he placed his hands on the podium, leaned in slightly, and began. "You know, when you get to my age, people assume you have all the answers. They think you've cracked some secret code to success. But let me tell you something. When I was your age, I didn't have a damn clue what I was doing." A ripple of amusement ran through the audience. He continued, his gravelly voice filling the hall. "The world was different then. I was a kid from San Francisco with no connections in Hollywood, no roadmap, and no guarantees. I wasn't some natural-born actor. Hell, I was working odd jobs, digging swimming pools, stacking hay, you name it. I got fired from a gas station once because the owner thought I didn't have enough personality." Imagine that. The audience chuckled. But there was something inside me, something that whispered, "Keep going." So I did. And along the way, I learned a thing or two about success. Not the kind you read about in self-help books. The real kind. The kind that isn't polished or pretty. And if you folks don't mind, I'd like to share a few of those lessons today. The room was silent. Not a single person so much as shuffled in their seat. Clint Eastwood was about to unravel his philosophy of success. Eastwood adjusted the microphone and let his gaze drift across the audience. He had their attention completely. Success isn't about walking through open doors. It's about kicking down the locked ones. He paused for effect, then leaned in. "Now, I know what some of you are thinking. That's easy for you to say, Clint. You're a Hollywood legend. But let me tell you how it really started." He took a deep breath, as if momentarily traveling back in time. 1950s Hollywood wasn't the friendliest place for nobodies like me. I was a kid who had spent time in the army, had no acting experience, and sure as hell didn't come from money. But I wanted to be in movies. I wanted it bad. So I did what any desperate young man would do. I knocked on every damn door I could find. He shook his head, smirking at the memory. Most of them didn't just shut. They slammed in my face. A few people chuckled, but most remained quiet, waiting for him to continue. You see, in life, you don't just get a single rejection. You get hundreds. Took me a while to understand that rejection isn't the enemy. Quitting is. I got laughed out of auditions, told I didn't have the right voice, the right look, the right whatever. But there's one rejection I'll never forget. The room leaned in. I had finally gotten a meeting at Universal Studios. A friend of a friend knew someone who could get me inside. They let me read a few lines, and after about 5 minutes, the casting director looks at me and says, "Kid, you should find something else to do with your life." A hushed murmur spread through the audience. That was my first real punch in the gut. And let me tell you something, I thought about quitting. I really did. But then I realized something. That guy wasn't in charge of my future. He wasn't the final judge of what I could be. Only I was. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. And that's the first lesson I want you to remember. Nobody gets to decide your worth except you. Applause broke out, but Eastwood simply raised a hand to silence it. Now, I didn't become a star overnight. Hell, I didn't even become an actor overnight. Took years. But one day, I got a break. A small role on a Western TV show called Rawhide. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. More importantly, it gave me a place to learn. Every day on that set, I studied how the camera moved, how directors made decisions, how actors carried themselves. I was like a damn sponge, soaking up every bit of knowledge I could. His voice softened. You see, success doesn't always come from talent alone. It comes from outlasting everybody else. Most people quit after their first rejection. The rest quit after their 10th. But the ones who make it, they're the ones who keep standing, even after life punches them in the face. The audience was locked in, hanging on his every word. So here's my second lesson. Be the last one standing. He stepped back from the microphone for a moment, scanning the room. Then, with that signature Eastwood squint, he added, "Now, if you think that's all there is to success, well, you're in for a surprise." Eastwood let the moment breathe, letting his words sink in before stepping forward again. His voice, though aged, carried the same power it always had on the big screen. Now, a lot of folks think I made it because of luck, that I just stumbled into the right role at the right time. But let me tell you something about luck. It only finds people who are prepared for it. He gripped the podium, his knuckles tightening slightly. See, most people think success is a straight road. You work hard, you get noticed, and boom, you've arrived. But that's a load of bull. Success isn't a road. It's a damn battlefield. He let that sink in. Think about it. How many times do you see someone with potential, someone with talent, but they never make it? They get tired. They get scared. They let other people's opinions drag them down. And before they know it, they're out of the fight. But the ones who win, they don't stop swinging. The audience was silent, enthralled by every word. Let me tell you about Fistful of Dollars, the movie that changed my life. Now, back in the early 60s, Westerns weren't exactly glamorous. I wasn't getting any huge offers, and I was tired of playing second fiddle on Rawhide. Then I got this call about some Italian filmmaker named Sergio Leone. He was making a Western in Spain, and they needed a lead actor. The catch? The budget was peanuts. The script was barely readable, and everyone said it was career suicide. He chuckled. Now, the old Clint would have said no. He would have waited for a better opportunity, a safer bet. But by then, I had learned something important. Sometimes the best way to win is to take the risk nobody else is willing to take. His voice turned serious. So I packed my bags, flew to Spain, and shot that movie for next to nothing. It was cold. It was rough. Half the crew didn't even speak English. But you know what? When Fistful of Dollars hit the screens, it blew the doors off everything. The audience erupted in applause. And that's my third lesson for you. Opportunity doesn't come wrapped in a pretty box. Sometimes it looks like a mess. Sometimes it looks like a gamble. But if you want to be successful, you have to see what others don't. You have to be willing to saddle up when everyone else is too scared to ride. He let out a breath, his mind momentarily drifting back to those early years. I call it the cowboy mentality. It means you take responsibility for your life. You don't wait for someone else to tell you what to do. You don't make excuses. You just get on your damn horse and ride. Laughter mixed with cheers from the audience. Now, some of you will go on to work in tech, some in medicine, some in law. But no matter what you do, you need to have that cowboy mentality. Because life doesn't care about your plans. Life is gonna throw you in the dirt. And when that happens, you've got two choices. Stay down or get back on your feet. He looked around, making eye contact with the students in the front row. And trust me, folks, I've eaten plenty of dirt in my time. The room was electric. This wasn't just another motivational speech. It was a masterclass in resilience from a man who had lived it. But there's one more thing about success that nobody ever tells you. He took a step back, crossed his arms, and nodded. And that, my friends, is where the real secret lies. The Stanford auditorium was so quiet that you could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning. Every eye was locked onto Clint Eastwood. He stood at the podium, his hands resting on either side, his gaze unwavering. There's something about success that nobody tells you. Not in books, not in classrooms, not even in Hollywood. His voice lowered, forcing everyone to lean in. Success is lonely. The words hung in the air like a slow, rolling storm. Now, I don't mean lonely like you ain't got people around you. I mean lonely like you're the only one who sees the road ahead. The higher you climb, the fewer people understand your journey. And sometimes the people closest to you, they don't get it. They'll question you. They'll doubt you. Some will even try to pull you back down. Not because they hate you, but because they're scared of what you might become. A few heads nodded in agreement. When I started directing movies, everyone thought I was crazy. I had built a career as an actor. I could have played cowboys and tough guys for the rest of my life and been just fine. But that wasn't enough for me. I wanted to tell my own stories. I wanted to create something bigger than myself. He took a step away from the podium and paced slightly. So I took another risk. I got behind the camera and made Play Misty for me. A small thriller, nothing fancy. But it worked. And you know what happened? Hollywood still didn't take me seriously as a director. They thought it was a fluke. Even after The Outlaw Josie Wales and Pale Rider, they still doubted me. But I didn't stop. I kept working. I kept learning. His eyes narrowed, his voice turning sharper. And then I made Unforgiven. A ripple of applause moved through the crowd. The 1992 film had won 4 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Director for Eastwood. And suddenly all those doubters were gone. They were replaced by people who always believed in me. Funny how that works. The audience laughed knowingly. So here's my 4th lesson. If you're waiting for the world to approve of your dreams, you're going to be waiting a long damn time. If you want to do something great, be prepared to walk that road alone for a while. He let the words sink in before continuing. And don't expect applause at the start. People don't cheer for the guy climbing the mountain. They only cheer once he reaches the top. He stepped back to the microphone, his face set in a familiar expression, the same quiet intensity that had defined his legendary characters. But let me tell you something. The view from the top is worth every damn step. A wave of applause surged through the auditorium. Some students were clapping, others whistled, and a few just sat there, taking it all in. Eastwood let the moment settle before giving a small nod. Now, there's one last thing I need to tell you, and it's the most important lesson of them all. The audience leaned in again. Because success? It ain't what you think it is. The applause faded, and once again, the room settled into silence. Eastwood leaned forward, gripping the edges of the podium, his voice steady but carrying the weight of decades of experience. Now, I've told you about the fight, the rejection, the loneliness, but let's talk about the part nobody ever sees. The part that comes after success. His eyes scanned the room, searching for the right words. You see, we grow up thinking success is the finish line. That if you just work hard enough, if you fight through the failures, one day you'll reach some magical point where everything makes sense. Where you've made it. He shook his head. But let me tell you something, it doesn't work like that. The room was so still, it was as if everyone had stopped breathing. I've won Oscars. I've made movies that will outlive me. I've had all the money, all the recognition anyone could ask for. And you know what? The moment you stop, the moment you sit back and think, I've done enough, that's the moment you start fading away. He let the words settle. Success isn't a place you reach. It's a way of living. You don't just win once and retire. You keep moving forward, keep creating, keep challenging yourself. Because the moment you stop growing, you start dying. A murmur ran through the audience. This wasn't the speech they had expected. It was something much deeper. I'm 94 years old. Most people my age have stopped working. But let me ask you something. Do I look retired? Laughter rippled through the room. No, because I love what I do. And that's the real secret to success. He raised a finger, emphasizing his point. You have to love the journey more than the reward. The audience erupted into applause, but Eastwood wasn't finished. He held up a hand, and the room fell silent again. Now, before I leave, I want to give you one last piece of advice. Something I've learned after all these years. His voice softened, but somehow carried even more power. There will come a time in your life when you're standing at a crossroads. One road will be safe, comfortable. The other, uncertain, difficult, maybe even terrifying. And in that moment, you will hear a little voice inside you, whispering, "Go for it." He paused. Listen to that voice. He stepped back, letting the weight of his words settle over the room. Then, in classic Clint Eastwood fashion, he gave a small nod and said, "Now go out there and make my day." The entire auditorium erupted. People leaped to their feet, cheering, clapping, some even wiping away tears. A standing ovation swept through Stanford University, one of the longest they'd ever seen. As Clint Eastwood gave a final nod and walked off stage, the students knew they had just witnessed something special, something unforgettable. Not just a speech, a legend passing down his wisdom. And with that, Clint Eastwood rode off into the sunset, just as he always had.